I'm Virginia Sapiro. I'm the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and I want to welcome you to the fall season of BU's Road to Washington discussion. This is a series we began last year, a cooperative effort between the College of Arts and Sciences and the School of Communication at Boston University. We began this last spring to have a series of discussions involving various faculty from around the university to talk about the elections as the season rolls on. We have purposely not, for any given panel discussion, picked a topic or a question because we thought politics can roll too fast, and what we have done is just made sure we have a number of good experts here, and whatever's going on, people will be talking about some of the major issues that are confronting us at the time. Our conversation today is also being streamed live through the Alumni Association's Ustream page, so a warm welcome to anyone viewing across the country or across the world. If you'd like to participate in this discussion through Ustream, simply share your questions on the page's wall as the page is being monitored, and the questions will be relayed to our panelists. And we are going to begin with a few minutes of comments from each of our panelists. Then we'll open up for questions, and anybody here in the room at BU may ask questions. And of course, the people watching out there through the web can also do the same. I'm going to begin now just by introducing each of the panelists here, and then they will take off and make their comments in order, and then we'll circle around and open it up. So first here, Doug Kriner is an associate professor of political science and the director of undergraduate studies in the Department of Political Science. His research interests include American institutions, the separation of power dynamics, and American military policymaking. He's the author of 2 books on the socioeconomic inequalities of war and the role of Congress in military action, and his work also has appeared in many leading journals such as the Journal of Politics, the British Journal of Political Science, Legislative Studies, and a host of others. His teaching interests include courses on the presidency, Congress, domestic politics and the use of force, and the separation of powers. And we're delighted that today is his wedding anniversary. And if it's really good to be in a debate for your anniversary, we think that it's almost as good to be on a panel about the debate. Next along the line, see, this is funny as well as very informative. Next along the line, Tammy Vigil has taught courses on communication theory, communication research methods, oral presentation, and contemporary mass communication at both the graduate and undergraduate levels. Her own research is on the rhetorical analysis of political communication and popular culture. She is co-author of the book, The Third Agenda in U.S. Presidential Debates from 2009, and is a past winner of the National Communication Association's Rage Baskerville Award for her analysis of an FDR campaign speech. And finally, at the other end, way down there, is Tom Fiedler, who began his tenure as Dean of the College of Communication in 2008, following a distinguished career in journalism. After his graduate career at COM, he joined the Miami Herald as an investigative reporter, a political columnist, the editorial page editor, and the executive editor. At the Herald, Fiedler received the Society of Professional Journalists Top Award for his coverage of the 1988 presidential election, a Pulitzer Prize for his work covering a religious cult, and was part of a team that won the Pulitzer Prize for the Herald's coverage of Hurricane Andrew. Dean Fiedler also embraced new media as a visiting Murrow Lecturer and Goldsmith Fellow at Harvard University's Shorenstein Center on Press Politics and Public Policy, where he investigated the impact of the web on the presidential primary system and taught a graduate course on the intersection of media, politics, and public policy. So with that, I will set us rolling here from Professor Kriner through Dean Fiedler, and then back to me, and then out to all of you. So Doug Kriner.
Well, thank you everyone so much for being here this afternoon and for giving me the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you. I will do my best to try and be briefer than one of President Obama's responses to a 2-minute question. And if someone tries to pull my mic at 5 seconds left, I will interrupt you rudely as well. So I'd like to make 3 points and try and do so briefly. So first off, regarding the debate, quite obviously a horrible night for President Obama. Governor Mitt Romney of Massachusetts showed up, not candidate Mitt Romney, who spent the last 5 years seeking the Republican nomination. Governor Romney was in favor of changes to the tax system, but only those that are deficit neutral. He explicitly rejected tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans, and even on the corporate tax, he struck a very moderate pose. On wider issues, with perhaps the exception of Medicare, Governor Romney looked very much like his former self when he was here in the Bay State, and not the person that we've seen so much, I think, on the campaign trail over the last 14 months to 6 years, depending on how you want to define it. Interestingly, I thought the Bush tax cuts never really came up. And here, the president seems to have a good advantage. Only 30% of Americans favor their complete extension, while 47% favor extending them only for Americans earning less than $250,000 a year, and 15% favor their complete expiration. Why the president didn't push Governor Romney on this when he said that he doesn't favor tax cuts for the wealthiest of Americans, I thought was somewhat puzzling. To me, where President Romney missed the greatest opportunity, however, where President Obama missed the greatest opportunity, was really enforcing Governor Romney to defend some of the split personality that he seemed to exhibit. By most tallies, President Bush also lost his debates to John Kerry in 2004. However, where he most succeeded was in questioning Kerry as a flip-flopper and trying to force out all of those inconsistencies. Governor Romney does not have a congressional voting record to defend, such as Senator Kerry did in 2004, but he does have the positions that he took at the debate and the positions that he's taken behind closed doors at fundraisers and in the public eye at so many of the GOP debates that obviously honed his debating skills. This, for me, was a huge opportunity for Obama, and instead he relied mainly on rehashing tired lines from relatively flat campaign speeches. And really never forced the governor to defend himself from charges of shaking up the Etch-a-Sketch, getting rid of the 47% of loafers that won't vote for him, and not worrying about them, and instead really painting himself, I thought, very successfully as a moderate who is a very appealing candidate. That said, point number 2, I still think that the debate was unlikely to really matter all that much. Emotionally, I thought it's hard for me not to side with Chris Christie, that last night really did turn the dynamics of the race on their head. However, let me sort of pitch something else to you, food for thought. Before last night, it's hard to imagine a candidate having a 2-week period that was much worse than the 2 weeks that Governor Romney had. He insulted half of the country, the majority of whom are seniors and veterans, for receiving government benefits and not paying income taxes. As President Clinton said in New Hampshire yesterday, quote, "The guy with a tax account in the Cayman Islands is attacking other people for not wanting to pay income tax. I mean, you've got to give him credit." His attacks on the administration's handling of the tragedy in Libya seem to have backfired, and there were multiple reports in the press about his campaign staff sniping at each other, trying to put the blame on who it was for the poor performance. And yet, when you look at the polls, they showed virtually no movement during the course of those 2 weeks, despite a string of unfortunate events for the campaign. So the most likely outcome I'd like to suggest is a blip on the radar screen, a bad night for President Obama, but one that has relatively little lasting impact. And then third and finally, I thought I'd like to talk about the fundamentals in the race as most political scientists would see them, and why, surprisingly perhaps, I'd argue, they still seem fairly strong for President Obama. This may seem like a crazy statement at a time when the unemployment rate, as Governor Romney correctly pointed out, is still above 8% and has been that way for the entire course of the Obama presidency. However, unemployment has never really been all that good of a predictor in presidential elections. So one of the things we have to ask ourselves, I think, is what is the right question to ask of voters? Is it, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Or is it, looking into the future, do you think that you'll be better off than you are today? In more technical political science parlance, this is a question of whether or not voters are primarily retrospective or whether they're prospective in terms of how they look at the economy and incorporate it into their political judgments. Interestingly, I think the polling data suggests that the answer to both questions aren't quite as bad for the president as they at first blush might seem. So thinking retrospectively, a poll asking a question in September, are you and your family better off than you were 4 years ago? 37% said better, only 42% said worse, and 19% said the same. At times when the question is asked, you sort of think the obvious answer has got to be, of course we're worse off. But most Americans, a majority, don't believe that that's the case. And even if you are not better off, who do you blame? The idea of retrospective voting is you blame the incumbent. But here again, that doesn't seem to be whom most Americans blame. So in a question in September again, do you think that the policies of Barack Obama and the Democrats or George W. Bush and the Republicans are more responsible for the country's current economic problems? Only 38% blamed the president, whereas 54% blamed President Bush and Republicans. So it's not even clear to me that on this metric, the situation is quite as dire for the Obama administration as it might imply. With prospective questions, there are so many that you can pick from that you might cherry pick, and there's a temptation. Let me just give you a few. In May of 2012, there's a question that hasn't been repeated, but 58% of Americans said they were hopeful, looking forward into the next 12 months. Another question in September said, during the next 12 months, do you think your personal situation will get better, worse, or stay the same? Only 12% thought that they would get worse in the next 12 months, whereas a third of Americans said better and 51% said the same. Finally, do you think the U.S. economy is recovering or not recovering? And 57% said that we were indeed on the road to recovery. So these baseline economic beliefs and preferences, coupled with the improved local economic conditions in the swing states, which after all, thanks to the genius of the Electoral College, are the only things that seem to matter in presidential elections, should, I would argue, overwhelm the president's poor debate and propel the president to a very narrow re-election victory.
Okay, thanks, Doug. That's interesting. I like the numbers. They're kind of fun. The number that I'm most interested in, or something that actually kind of piqued my interest a couple weeks ago, was a poll that came out that argued or claimed that approximately 3/4 of the people polled said that they had nothing in common or very little in common with Mitt Romney. Not that many said they had much in common or perceived much in common with President Obama, but it was substantially more that did. And so I've been really fascinated lately with this idea of identification building, or the creation of consubstantiality with the audience. And what that basically means is a candidate tries to do things and say things and portray themselves in a way so that the audience sees themselves as being connected, as having something in common, as having a shared perspective, as thinking that the candidate has an understanding of what their perspective is. And Barack Obama did a wonderful, beautiful, amazing job of building points of identification with his audience in the 2008 campaign. A lot of people thought that he was basically the embodiment of the American dream, and by voting for him, you would be reifying the fact that the dream can exist. This poor child who was on food stamps, broken home, mother had to work 2 jobs, go to school, was on food stamps for a while, then becomes a viable candidate and eventually wins the presidency of the United States. It was a beautiful story that we all really, well, I don't know about all, I guess I shouldn't say all, but many of us liked and embraced. That story seems to have disappeared a bit during this particular campaign. He hasn't brought it up as often, he hasn't talked about it as much, and there's an assumption that people already know him and have a connection to him. Romney, on the other hand, has a problem. Romney has a huge problem building points of identification with his audience. We've seen this throughout the entire campaign so far, including the things like when he was mocking fans at a NASCAR race for wearing ponchos, you know, those plastic ponchos that you basically get for free or for like $2 when it's raining and you have nothing else to wear. And he basically mocked them and said things like, what, you couldn't spring for a raincoat? You know, or when asked about his fandom of NASCAR, and he said, oh, I have friends who own NASCAR races. racers, right? The whole thing about, having a horse in the Olympics. I mean, he's got sort of this distanced approach. And every time he's tried to build points of connection, he has had difficulty with it. Looking, for example, to the formal launch of the general election, which is the nomination acceptance address. In his address, which was a total debacle to begin with, apparently 8 days before, they're throwing out scripts and they're starting from scratch. And the actual speech that he gave was something that he was an architect of, as opposed to having many speech writers to write them. And in that speech, he declined, I should say, the ability to actually connect with the audience yet again. He'd say things like, let me tell you about myself, let me tell you about me so that you know who I am and how I'll lead. And then he proceeds to talk for about 6 or 7 paragraphs, all of which maybe 30 words come out about him. It's about his parents, it's about Neil Armstrong. He doesn't actually talk about himself very much. He doesn't give points of connection. He doesn't actually tell his story, in spite of the fact that the Republican National Convention was touted as telling the Mitt Romney story. Now, one of the things that I thought was kind of interesting is that we get bits and pieces of how not to connect to Mitt Romney until, actually, strangely enough, the first debate. In the first debate, Mitt Romney started to become the likable guy, oddly enough, and it pains me a bit to say that because I've been kind of liking the fact that he's not, because it kind of builds this theory that I've been working on, but that's okay. That's sort of an aside.
So much for theories.
I'm just selfish that way sometimes. But the idea is that, in this particular debate, he started to emerge. And sorry for this side, but if you guys watch the Colbert Report at all, Colbert Report loves to rip on him a lot. And there's this great joke that I thought was kind of funny where they said the new Mitt Romney. What's the next Mitt Romney? Because there's so many incantations of him. And the joke was, there was the businessman Mitt Romney. There was the Latino Mitt Romney. And so, he kind of changes his personhood, and that's a difficult thing for people to have. And so last night, the human Mitt Romney started to appear in interesting ways. Right from the very beginning of the debate, when President Obama said his lovely thing about the anniversary and 20 years and loving to Michelle. And then Mitt Romney, who could have easily just stepped aside from that, could have made a simple comment, actually joked and got a laugh. And he made a comment about, not being the most romantic setting. And I thought that was pretty effective in humanizing him from the start. But then as he went through the rest of his speech, or the rest of his debate answers, he actually added bits and pieces of likability in terms of his passion, which hadn't really shown up before, in terms of some of the bits of stories that he told about meeting people on the campaign trail, about Ann Romney meeting people on the campaign trail, and he started to try to build some points of connection. I'm not sure that he's done enough in that debate in order to actually solve the problems that he's created already in terms of the not knowing who Mitt Romney really is, but it sure did create enough buzz that the Republicans afterwards really seemed to get very excited about it. I will say he did cause some problems for himself, though, when he threatened to kill Big Bird. The Twitterverse exploded. This morning, PBS was still trending, and there were actually tweets from Big Bird himself, although I don't think it's been a verified account, but there were still tweets about, killing Big Bird. And I think that that's going to be a little bit difficult, and that's kind of the Mitt Romney that people expected, was the killing of the Big Bird guy. Just a couple quick other comments, and then I'll pass it along to Dean Fiedler. Things about the actual debate that I think were influential, that people tend to take on a little bit more than they probably should. And I think Doug did a great job of breaking down the content in terms of the substance, but there's also the affective elements of the debate that do affect the audience, the way that they interpret what was going on. For example, the split screen layout. When there was a split screen, Mitt Romney actually played the split screen amazingly well. He would look, and it looked as though they were sitting about as close as Dean Fiedler and I are, and he would look to President Obama, and he would talk at him, and he would attack, and he would speak. And as Dean Fiedler's looking at me and having a response to me, Barack Obama wasn't doing the same thing, because on the stage, they're quite a ways away. He was doing what was actually reasonable to do in a debate, taking some notes and paying attention to what the argument was. But because he wasn't looking back at candidate Romney, it made it look like he was disconnected. It made it look like he was maybe a little bit smug, was one of the words that I'd heard, and that he wasn't actually engaged in the debate as effectively. Now, this is really a function of the decision, the editorial decision, to put a split screen up there. Because if they had been doing single shots, and it was just Mitt Romney standing there looking like this, and the audience is actually out here, and you're in the television viewing audience, he looks like he's not paying attention, right? Mitt Romney looks like he's looking somewhere else, like he's not connected. So those editorial choices that happen at the network level, and sometimes also they actually negotiate those kinds of things with the Commission on Presidential Debates as well, those do have an impact on how we perceive the candidates, how we feel about their performance, and what we actually think about them moving forward. So it'll be interesting to see how different formats will actually alter the way that we see them portrayed on screen, as well as how we see them in terms of their interaction with one another. So, I think
Very good. Happy anniversary, Doug. Get that out. Just do like everybody did last night. I'm going to talk primarily about the media side of all of this, because that's what debates primarily are. This is a performance that is done in the media, influenced by the media. There are really three phases to debate, or to look at when you're assessing the debate. The pre-debate phase, the debate itself, and then the post-debate phase. The pre-debate phase is interesting in that it's all about the expectations that will surround the candidates. And if you watched the coverage in the week or so leading up to it, both candidates were working very hard to try to set an expectation level. And clearly, if you're the candidate, you want to set the expectations for your own performance as low as possible, because it's always better to exceed everyone's expectations and surprise them than it would be to meet expectations or fall short of what the expectations were. So with the single exception, a lot was made of this, of New Jersey's Governor Chris Christie. All of Mitt Romney's advisors who had the chance to talk about this, and of course Mitt Romney himself, Governor Romney, tried to talk about how he was really the underdog in this, because after all, he's going up against the President of the United States, the most powerful leader in the world, and he should be just lucky to be able to get on the stage without breaking into a sweat and dissolving in front of us. That was what the Romney campaign was attempting to do. President Obama's campaign manager, David Plouffe, who Stephen Colbert has great fun with his name, he of course tried to downplay the president's ability to do well by pointing out that Governor Romney had been through some 20 debates as a candidate, and in total, if you count both campaigns, something on the order of 37 or 38 debates. So that's the expectation level. And I think it was probably fair to say, given, as Doug pointed out, the horrible week or two that Governor Romney had leading up to the debate, the expectation for Governor Romney was fairly small, although the argument always was, but this is the most important night of his entire life, and if he does badly, it's all over for him. He literally was like the proverbial fighter on the ropes, and so you had that working for Mitt Romney. So that's the pre-debate, the setup. So people go into that night looking at this, not expecting really a great deal from Mitt Romney, expecting quite a lot from President Obama, because we all know how eloquent he can be. So then you have the debate itself, and what how the media covers the debate. Now, when I say how the media covers it, because this is primarily going to be television still is the dominant medium when it comes to the way that most voters would see on this. You're not going to have very many people who woke up this morning and for the first time, if they still buy newspapers, go out to their doorstep and pick it up and say, oh my gosh, there was a debate last night. Let me read all about it so I know what happened. That day is gone if it was ever really here. People will have watched the debate last night, or they'll have started to see what television did. So knowing that, the candidates will go into the debate typically armed with their, not only the talking points that they want to do, but what we all heard a lot about is they want to have the sound bite, or it's now referred to as, because they said it, as the zingers. You want to say that thing that ultimately becomes the iconic clip that either resonates through the news the next day or resonates through history. And we probably saw a lot of that in the pre-debate coverage. It's that the old, in the vice presidential debate, I knew John Kennedy and you're no John Kennedy, or Gerald Ford deciding that Poland was actually a free country when it was still under Soviet domination. Ronald Reagan to Jimmy Carter, there you go again, Mr. President, sort of demeaning it. There were those kind of iconic moments. So the candidates went into last night with their zingers ready to go. I think what was really pretty interesting was how either ineffectively they wielded them or they just kind of abandoned them. You know, occasionally you'd hear one kind of slip through, but because it was drowned in the rest of the answers, you didn't really, I don't think, see anything last night that the media would jump on and play over and over again, the proverbial, the gaffe, the thing that clearly could cause people to think differently about the candidates. So again, the media covers these things, you know, like you mentioned NASCAR. The media covers debates like the sports media would cover NASCAR, as they're waiting for the crack-up, and that's what they want to see. There really wasn't a crack-up last night, and with no crack-up, without an iconic result, I'll get into the third part then. We're now in the post-debate phase. What do you look for? Well, those, even people who watched the debate last night, you know, you have to realize the U.S. electorate, you know, I hate to say this, but there's perhaps only 5% who are even undecided in the polls. The reality is those 5% are so confused they don't know which way is up. We don't know whether somebody is honestly still trying to decide at this point is subject to question. And most polls will show that, you know, 20-some% of American voters believe angels are real. So, you know, where are we? Are these really discerning voters? Will they have picked something out of the debate last night to make a difference or not? I'd be skeptical about that. History would show that, that debates rarely, outside of a really, truly gaffe, debates don't sway the outcome there. So I think that's where we were. Did any of you watch this on CNN last night? CNN, they did something. They had put together a focus group, and they do this frequently in advertising. Everybody in the focus group, supposedly undecided, I don't know where they find these people, but they arm everybody with this little device that has a knob that you twist. It's like a rheostat on a light that the more you turn it, the brighter the light. But this is, you're supposed to register as you're hearing a candidate give an answer. You turn it in one direction if you like it. The more you like it, the harder you turn it. It goes up. If you don't like the answer, you turn it in the other direction, and it goes down into the negative. And so CNN last night had the line running at the bottom of the screen throughout the debate. So you could actually see how this, quote, undecided focus group how they were responding emotionally to the statements. Well, throughout the night, I never saw a line go into the negative territory. So everybody sort of maybe liked a little more, women, men, what was said, didn't like it so much, or stayed sort of flat, but it never did it go down to a point where you'd say, whoa, Governor Romney blew that, or President Obama blew that. It just really was kind of flatlined, sort of like the moderator was last night. It just kind of went on straight forward. So, and to kind of pick up on Doug's point, what we're going to be looking at over the next several days is, what did the media decide the sound bites are going to be? And based on what I've seen this morning, just in the last few hours, it's pretty confused. The media hasn't decided what exactly were the best lines. And when they do come out with it, they appear to be giving about equal time to both Romney's lines and Obama's responses. Frankly, that's a huge favor to President Obama, because by and large, I don't think he connected with the audience, as the broader audience, as well. So, but keep an eye on what happens, and perhaps tomorrow or over the weekend on Sunday, just kind of see what is actually survived out of this debate. I'd be surprised if very much did, beyond the consensus that Governor Romney, given the opportunity to stand up there, shoulder to shoulder, as it were, with the President of the United States, succeeded in at least establishing that he had the gravitas to stand there with the president and not appear to be a minor or subservient or a lesser figure. That's critically important for him, along with looking to be, relatively likable. So, and one other point, Dr. Vigil mentioned the Twitterverse. That's what's different about this election than any election we've seen before. We started to see a little bit in '04 with Governor Dean initially, how social media could have a role. In '08, social media started to come of age, but we didn't have really, Twitter wasn't out there in '08. It's here now. So what is different is there is the Twitterverse, and how the Twitterverse now responded could be kind of interesting in that it will join the TV medium there. But you have to remember that only about 10% of the electorate actually use Twitter or follow Twitter. And I would be stunned if there's anybody on the Twitterverse who hadn't already decided who they wanted to vote for anyway. If you're in Twitter, you figured out months ago who you really liked in this election. So anyway, so there we go with the media side.
That's great, thank you. Let me just pick up a couple of points, and then we'll open it up. I think picking up from the debate and going forward, some very important points is who was around to watch, to be influenced, if they would be influenced, and you can bet that most of the people watching, especially those who didn't fall asleep after the first 7 to 8 minutes, are all political junkies who know pretty much where they're going to be. I was actually surprised. I was bouncing around on Twitter to see what was going on, and it seemed to me remarkably cool. There wasn't much going on there either, which kind of surprised me, because that's usually where you get a lot of repartee and people picking up on zinger lines, and I don't think they found anything to grab hold of. So who's going to be influenced, and how are they going to be influenced? We do have a situation here which we know from a lot of past research, which is a lot of the major impact of media events does not happen from those who watch the original event. It happens from those who hear the news about it. So what we need to watch, if we're going to watch for the bounce for Romney, and certainly if there's going to be a bounce, it's going to be Romney, not Obama, who was pretty flat last night. But what you'd watch is the immediate after polls saying, well, Romney did somewhat better, but there's not going to be much impact. It's really over the next couple of days as the noise that Romney did better gets louder and cleaner, right? Because you can't have the spinners, the Democratic spinners right afterward. They're going to get drowned out because, whatever they say about how well the president did, nobody's going to buy it. So over the next couple of days, we might see a little bit of bounce as you get the cleaner story out there. And it could get magnified to the point where some people are saying, oh, well, I watched it and it was a slam dunk. Not so much, but that's really how we'll watch it. So what I want to do is open this up. Let me remind you, as with each of these cases, this is not the place to advocate for a candidate. That's not what we've set this up for. There are plenty of other places to do that. What we're really trying to do here is understand what's going on and how we analyze this and what the impact will be. You do not have to feel constrained just to talk about the debates last night or even the presidential election. We do have some other elections going on in this very state, and they've had some debates too. So really, we can open it up, those of you online and those of you here, to ask any questions of anybody on the panel. So I believe that there are mics around. So could you wait for the signal and wait for the mic, because all our ships at sea are listening also, and because this is being recorded and will be on the internet later. So.
I was wondering, most political candidates, at least at that high level, do things for strategic reasons. So everybody in the media that I heard, they were puzzled by Obama sleeping through it and being so listless. But don't they always do things for a reason? And could he have been like the batter who goes up and takes the first 2 pitches, waiting for his opponent to make a mistake because he's got a lead as it is? Was that perhaps strategy that he was tried, but then it just went awry somewhere?
Well, I would be surprised if his strategist said, okay, let's go out there and be totally flat and ignore what's going on and just see if Romney screws up. That I don't think is actually what's going on. I think, first of all, people have bad days. People have bad performances, and this might just be a bad performance. But I also think that people forget, because it's what I do, I went back and watched some of the 2008 debates before this debate. That's how I spent my evening last night. It's just what's fun. I like it. And to be perfectly honest, people tend to remember Obama's debate performances as much better than they actually were. And he really is a good orator. He does a nice job delivering a well-written speech. But when he's up there on the stage, he's not nearly as savvy as we tend to remember him as being. And so comparing him to 2008, he wasn't really that far off, but he was flat. He was flatter than usual. But he's not as good as people tend to remember him as being, and so I think he suffered a little bit from those expectations that are misaligned, I think, or not really reflective of the truth. I think the other sides to that too, I think instead of just saying, it may have been strategy for him to kind of lay low, to be perfectly honest, it would have probably been better strategy for him to hit one out of the park and really just make it be over, right? That would have been a better approach if that was the strategy. So I think it might be just a combination of our bad memories of him and our misremembering his good debates of the past, and I think of just having an off night too.
Would underscore that. The expectations I had of him is he had to look very presidential. And so he didn't have to do a lot, but he had to look presidential, but he didn't pull that off. And I actually really agree with Tammy. Most public speakers have specialties that they're very good at. And from my point of view, I think that President Obama is very good at the teleprompter run speech. And if you've ever watched him, especially live, he can do a speech with the teleprompters that make you think he doesn't have teleprompters. He's great at reading. He kind of hesitates and looks for a word, and you have a feeling on the teleprompter it says, hesitate, look for a word. But he's very good at that. If you go back to 2008, look at what he did against Hillary Clinton, not that great. Right. Look what he did against John McCain, not too difficult.
If he did have a strategy, and his strategy was to take the 2 pitches, as you say, it might have been, and I heard someone mention this last night, it is that the one thing that he had to avoid doing is showing that he loathes Mitt Romney. And so, and the reason why he didn't want people to show that he can't stand him was that President Obama has a double-digit lead over Mitt Romney in the likability factor. But if he came on stage last night and showed that I can't stand being within 20 feet of this guy because I consider him to be spineless and all the things you've heard he supposedly says in private about him by being a shapeshifter, so he couldn't show that. So he stifled himself. It was like seeing him bite down hard on his back molars not to show any emotion whatsoever and just go through it with the flat line. Again, that would be if you would say and give him credit that there was a strategy to his being flat, it would be only to show that he didn't have an emotional dislike of his opponent.
And just one really quick response. I would just say that it's easy to sit here and blame President Obama for a bad performance, and he didn't give a very good performance. But Governor Romney, I think, gave a very good performance. And I think to some extent, I think we were all been focused on the latter. And Governor Romney deserves full credit for really coming out, presenting a very, I think, likable and moderate vision of himself, one that can appeal to a large segment of the electorate. And it was in contrast to that that Obama looked so bad. It wasn't, John McCain on the other side of the podium.
Thank you, great question. Other questions here or somewhere else? Can we have a mic here?
This is kind of related to that, but I was just wondering, watching the debate last night, it almost appeared Obama was more like apathetic and wasn't as, like you said, he wasn't as displaying emotions as much, but wasn't as interested as, whereas you said Romney gave more of a higher performance, which really contrasted. So I was wondering what your thoughts were on that, if you thought Obama was kind of being apathetic towards it, or if it was maybe part of the plausible strategy.
Somebody want to take it?
Well, I think there certainly was, if you turn off the sound and just watched their body language, which sometimes is a good way to do it, it looked like Mitt Romney had had a double shot of espresso just before he went on there, because he jumped around and it was constantly. And with President Obama, he was, the too cool for school kind of person. He had a double shot of Chardonnay or something. He was quite the other way. So I think the appearance suggested, but that's President Obama's temperament. He always has been relatively emotionless in the way he goes about it. What I do think surprised people was to see Romney being the electric kind of a person that people weren't expecting.
Although I did have some people who responded who said that weird look on his face when he was watching the president speak, and he had sort of this odd smirky kind of look. Some people weren't quite sure how to interpret that look. So that's another sort of element to it. But at least he was there and present, and actually he seemed like he was engaged in the debate a lot more throughout. So.
Other questions? Somewhere back there.
I watched the debate on CNN, and I was struck by two things. One was I found myself very frustrated by the tightness of the close-ups on the two men, in that we couldn't see their larger body movements. We couldn't see how they held themselves. All we could see really was from the neck up. And I found that really frustrating, because so often when you're looking at affect, you want more cues. You want more sense of how they're really reacting. And we got no hand movements. We got no sort of larger movement at the podium. So I just found that it felt unusually tight. And I did flip over at one point, I think, to ABC at one moment, and they were not doing the split screen at that moment, and I felt like I was getting a much different sense of the debate that was going on. So I don't know if anybody has a comment about that sort of decision. But the other thing that I think is even more important is that, the lines of the Undecided, they had split them into men and women. And it was completely evident that anytime Romney was speaking, the men's line was higher than the women's, pretty significantly. And the same was true of Obama, but reversed, that every time he spoke, the women's line was much higher. So I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about, if that, what that data might suggest. Of course, they probably know this. They know where they stand with men versus women. But how's that going to affect what they focus on trying to say in the next two debates?
Those are good questions. I was watching C-SPAN, which also had the split screen, and I actually found it so annoying that I couldn't see the full body language, but I wasn't smart enough to turn to some other station. So instead I had in front of me, while I was playing with Twitter, I had the New York Times page on where they were streaming it, and there I could see the whole thing. But it is very different. I mean, look at us. If you just saw here tight, that's very different from what's going on, and you would have seen some of the things that Tammy talked about. So I think all of us who watched the split screen really lost something other than being able to be complimentary to the makeup people that they both used, because you couldn't see the line, which is really skilled. With respect to the gender differences, I kind of wish I had watched that, but I would have expected those lines to do that, because there is a pretty substantial gender difference carrying on. As a lot of you know, we've had some difference in the response of men and women to the two parties and to the candidates really since 1980, although those differences vary in how big they are. Some years they're very big and some years not so big. This is one of the big years, and Obama has a great advantage among women. His base, the women are more in the Democratic base and men are a little bit more in the Republican base, but it's very clear all along as you look at the public opinion polls that Obama has a very steady advantage among women and Romney does among men. There's really not much they have to do to feed that. I think they know enough, and certainly their handlers know enough, that they should not try to feed that by doing what some people think of as the traditional men's and women's issues, because most of those things aren't right. They're in the right places, because what divides the men and women is mostly somewhat different stances about the economy, the solutions to the economy, security, questions about jobs and social welfare, health care, and so forth. So they're right where they need to be with their best constituencies. What you want to see is whether either of them can start eating into the support for the other one.
You know, what I noticed about those lines is that number one, they responded in just the way that the polls already show, that there is, particularly among white men, a big gap toward Romney, and women voters tend to strongly go toward Obama. And if you watch those lines along with what the subject was at the moment, those issues that we refer to as the kitchen table issues, the sort of things that family would talk about sitting around the kitchen table, the sending their kids to college, Medicare, if that means taking care of a relative, or Medicaid. Whenever the kitchen table issues were brought up, you would see the yellow line, which was the women, draw apart from the green. Whenever you would see the discussion turn to jobs and taxes, the green line would go up, the men away from it. It struck me almost that clearly these, quote, undecided women weren't that interested in the debate or discussion about the taxes or the deficit. But they were keenly interested in the discussion about education. That's where I saw the biggest gap. And it'll be interesting to see if they do this in the future debates when they get into issues that may strike more closely to the gender gap. If they do ever get into a discussion about abortion rights, for instance, what that would do. But I think those lines so tracked what we already see in the polling that I had real questions about whether these people were really undecided or just said they were undecided so that they could get to hold the machine and turn the dial.
We're running near the end of time. For folks who are watching online, are there questions coming from online? Okay. Other questions here? Maybe one more question? We've got someone here in the middle. I'm pointing and squinting because the light's in my eyes and my glasses are dirty, so I can't see anything. Thank you. Raise your hand over here, please. Thank you.
Hi. My question has to do with the Scott Brown-Elizabeth Warren recent two debates. And I just wondered if you might talk a little bit about what I perceive as his particular condescending view towards women, and the subtext in regard to the affirmative action piece that he really characterized, or didn't so specifically speak about, but sort of tainted that with his talking about the Native American concept in regard to Elizabeth Warren.
Somebody want to handle the gender dynamic of the Brown-Warren debates? And there are a couple of different levels of that.
Well, I think strategically, what the Brown-Warren race is it's virtually decided. There is only small single digits, according to the consensus of the polls, that would separate the two. And in that, the undecided factor or category, overwhelmingly, it's women. So I don't think, I think Scott Brown has given up on trying to persuade women here. What he's trying to do is, I believe, excite his base toward turnout, and so he's using that heritage issue to get at her, it's a character assault, a character attack. She's a liar. That's basically what he is trying to do. And if he can either get her to respond in a way that hurts her, she loses her cool over it, that's one thing, or if it excites his base so that he gets a disproportionately heavy turnout, and her base is lethargic because Obama's going to win this state by 30 points anyway. That's, I think, what he's hoping for here. He's given up trying to persuade undecideds. Right now, this is, I've got to draw blood, I've got to throw her off her game, and I've got to get my base out. That's why I think he's doing that.
One thing that was interesting here is in the first debate, again, I was watching Twitter, and here's a really different kind of situation. The Twitter was hot during the first debate. It was going, I mean, it kept saying 20 more tweets, 20 more, 40 more, 50 more, and kept moving. And one of the points where it was entirely active was when he kept saying, you know, stop trying to scare women, Professor Warren, stop trying to scare women. And somebody came in on Twitter and said, I just asked my wife whether she's scared by Senator Brown, and she said no. And then there was a whole bunch of, you know, everybody grabbed onto that and said, no, I'm not scared either. No, my wife's not scared either. So, you know, people were picking up on that as it didn't work maybe in the direction he thought, and I think it's part of the reason that he's just moving much more into trying to undermine her character with both, you know, the Harvard professor thing, her salary and not teaching so much, and then the Indian heritage. So I'm going to ask my director here, do we have time for more? One more we have time for. There's one right there. Thank you. This is sort of a game. I send the microphone as far from where they are as they could possibly be. Thank you.
Last night, the name Donald Trump was thrown out there. And I was just curious. I was kind of surprised this morning that there hasn't been as much talk about calling Donald Trump a small business. And I was just curious, do you think there's a particular reason why? And do you think a middle-class voter in Ohio would have taken that the wrong way or would have been upset by those comments?
I thought it was sort of, you know, if anyone I thought looked like they had practiced zingers, it looked like it was much more President Obama instead of Governor Romney. I mean, he sort of worked more of them in, and I think they sort of stood out more maybe because there were so many in the middle that, you know, you caught the zinger because he wasn't frenetic and really taking the time in. Yeah, I don't think anyone would take that wrong. Speaking of Ohio, I'm absolutely shocked that the president made it through an hour and a half on the economy and didn't mention the auto bailout. That was really surprising. I would imagine that Axelrod and Prof are, you know, sitting there banging each other, wondering when their guy's gonna, you know, sort of wake up and mention the fact that he saved a lot of jobs in a swing state, which he didn't choose to mention. But with Trump, I mean, I just sort of thought that, you know, it's sort of another effort to try and show that, you know, oh look, you know, for Governor Romney, for someone of, you know, that type of wealth, you know, then sure, Donald Trump is a small business. And you know, I don't think the line landed real well. I don't think anyone picked it up, but you know, I don't think it really ran the risk of hurting him at all. I think it was just sort of another effort of trying to say, you know, that only someone like Mitt Romney could come up with a definition that would have, you know, Donald Trump be characterized as a small business.
Well, and one of the places that I have seen the Trump quote come up a couple of times is in the fact checkers, right? There's been so many, the fact checkers have been going crazy with this whole campaign, but also especially with last night's debate. And one of the things that they did point out was that under specific I can't remember exactly what the place was, but under some definitions, because Donald Trump does own some companies that have fewer than X number of employees or X number of X amount of revenue, that he actually does qualify as a small business owner, and so that wasn't actually an erroneous statement by the president, but the fact that it didn't get picked up and kind of spun around, or that's been really interesting. I think also, just as a quick aside on the zinger sort of idea, one of the ones that I was a little disappointed in that I think Obama just delivered so flatly but could have been really good was when he was saying about the secret plans, and boy, are they just too good? And the delivery was so flat that you didn't even quite realize that was a zinger till afterwards, and you go, wait, did he just zing him? Wait, was that, did he mean to be sarcastic there? Because that didn't quite carry out. But I thought that was going to be an interesting line that didn't end up going anywhere because of the bad delivery. So
a de-zinged zinger. So as we move forward now, we know that President Obama today is out there trying to get an energy infusion. He's in a really tough town for him to meet today. He's on the University of Wisconsin campus in Madison, Wisconsin, so we know that's going to be a really tough one for him. And we have Governor Romney, who is presumably out there trying to ride this, this really positive feeling he got from tonight. What impact both of them will have, we don't know, but so stay tuned. This is the cliffhanger part of this. I want to thank very much my colleagues here on the panel. I'd like to thank Caitlin Nee, who organized this for us and has been keeping our trains running on time. I'd like to thank those of you who are out there in the online world. Please send us questions. And to say that the next installment of this series will be on Thursday, October 18th, right back here at 12:30. Same routine, tell your friends, bring your lunch in. We'll have not exactly this panel, some combination of people who will be talking about whatever there is to talk about at that point. So thank you all for coming, and see you next time.